So today I want to show you how to install a rear sway bar on a Subaru that never came with one from the factory. So we're going to be working on this 94 Legacy sedan today. If you got one of these early 90s Subarus, Imprezas, Legacies, usually 1990 to around 95, sometimes 96, a lot of the more base models never included a rear sway bar, and you can still install one even if it didn't come with it. All the mounting points are on the car to add all the brackets and everything you're going to need, and I'm going to show you how to do that. The other reason I'm going to be doing some of this is part of installing the rear sway bar kit involves replacing the rear lateral links, and on this car here the rear lateral links are bent. I'll show the other one here. This one in particular is quite bent. That's happened because this car came from an auction and was a non-running vehicle, and a lot of times they will pick up non-running vehicles with a forklift to move them around, and they just sort of slide the forks underneath there and lift the whole thing up. And yeah, these lateral links on these cars are not meant to support a load, the weight of the car, and can bend rather easily. Actually can be sort of a good thing that they bend as easily as they do, because they're not that hard to replace, and it prevents bending your rear cross member and other aspects of the chassis if they were built too strong. So what you're going to need is everything I have laid out here. You can find all this stuff at the wrecking yard. Pull it off of any 90s Legacies, Imprezas, even Foresters. It'll be fairly interchangeable. Main thing is you're going to need lateral links like these that have brackets to hold the sway bar end links. Those will be going right in here. A sway bar. This is just the basic 13 millimeter stock one. If you're doing this, you could also upgrade to a white line or something bigger, or even find a WRX sway bar from, I think if you can find an 02 sway bar, those are 20 millimeter. Most of the others from like 03 to 06 or 7, I believe, are 17 millimeter. And those can be a nice upgrade from this little stock one that doesn't do a whole lot, but I've got it, so I'll install it for now. You're also going to need the sway bar mounting brackets. These are going to go on the frame. Okay, so these brackets here will be mounted to the frame right here. Yeah, just like that. And there is holes in the frame, even if the car never came with a sway bar. You may have to punch or knock out little plastic plugs that are covering these holes. They'll look kind of something like this here. And there may be, like on this car here, there's some kind of underbody coating and dirt covering them. But if you're pulling all these parts off of a car at the wrecking yard that has these mounts, they'll be mounted right up here. The one on the passenger side can be more difficult because one of the mounting holes is up here underneath the fuel fill spout, and that one can be kind of a pain to get to and kind of difficult when it comes to the install. So just something to watch out for. The other thing to note is, depending on what car you get these brackets from, there are two different sizes. These are the standard ones, but if you get them from an Outback or a Forester, they will be a little bit taller to compensate for the fact that those cars are essentially lifted versions of a Legacy or Impreza. So just make note of, if you have a Forester and Outback, try to find the taller ones. If you're putting them on a standard Legacy or Impreza, you're going to want these shorter ones. Alright, so to start, we're going to want to remove these bent old lateral links that don't have any mounts on them for the sway bar. And you're going to need to take this long bolt out here that runs all the way through the knuckle. This bolt, I've already loosened it and taken it out once before. If you notice, this car has no differential in the back or axles. You can watch my rear differential removal video for that. These bolts can sometimes be very difficult to remove, especially if you have a car from the East Coast or Rust Belt area. Very common for them to get completely rusted in place, so you might have to cut them or torch them out. Recommend, if you have a rusty car, have a new set ready to go. You can find them on eBay. Pretty easy to get replacements. Also, if you're looking for these parts in a wrecking yard, be ready to potentially have to cut them off. Maybe bring a battery-powered angle grinder or something. But anyways, let's get these out. So, it may or may not come out that easily for you. And then we're going to need to take this bolt out here. This is an eccentric bolt. You can see kind of eccentric washer welded to it. This is what allows you to align the rear of the car. So when you tear all this apart, you should be ready to have to do an alignment afterwards. And I'll do a future video on how to do a simple alignment at home on a Subaru. It's not actually that difficult.
You need a 17 and a 22 wrench to take this off. And make sure you keep track of all the washers and spacers that are in here. So we're going to need them.
Alright, you can see how bent that is, and difference between the sway bar and non-sway bar style. You're going to want to make sure you keep all this hardware. There is another eccentric washer that goes on the back side of this bolt, followed by a thicker washer. It's kind of a spacer. So don't lose any of that, because you're going to need it to put it back together properly. And these lateral links are left and right specific. This is your left one here. The bracket should hang down because of the U-shaped lateral link that will later be mounted right in here like that. So I'm going to get this bolted back together, and we can move on to the other side. And when you're reassembling this, make sure you pay attention to this eccentric washer here that goes on the back side of the bolt. This all might not be so easy to see when you're doing it, because I have the rear diff removed and the axle out of the way. This all can still be done with everything in place. But make note that there is a little
flat spots on this bolt that line up with this kind of cut out opening in this washer. So when you put it back together, make sure that lines up with the flat points on here. Don't just shove it in there and crank it down, or when you try to turn this eccentric to adjust the toe alignment in the rear, it won't adjust properly. And don't forget this washer here, and then the nut.
Also, when assembling all this stuff, don't completely torque and tighten down any of the hardware until everything is completely assembled. You'll need to be able to move some of these suspension links into place, and you don't want to be cranking on them and putting the bushings in a bind. So ideally you want to wait until you are completely finished reassembling everything and can actually put some weight on the car before tightening all these bolts down. That way these bushings in here aren't put in any sort of bind or preload, and will allow the suspension to move properly when you're actually driving the car. Okay, so now that the lateral links are installed, you can install the sway bar mounting brackets. So these are also left and right specific, and they should be labeled with an L and an R so that you don't get them mixed up. And these will be mounted right here on the frame rail. I've already done my best to clean out these threaded mounting holes here and put a little bit of PB Blaster on them. Depending on where your car is from, again, if you're from a rust area, you might have more trouble using these, especially if they haven't been covered with anything over the years. You might need to get a tap and re-thread them, or possibly even get a helicoil and drill them out. That's going to be more difficult over here on this side, mainly because this fuel filler neck, which might have to be moved. So hopefully on your car they're not overly rusted and are still usable. So I'll start here with this one on the left hand side. You want to take note of which way you install it. It should be pretty obvious. If you try to install it the wrong way like this, it's not going to look right. And they even have an arrow on there as well, pointing forward, so that you can orientate them correctly. So go ahead and get these bolted up. And something else, when you go and get these parts from the wrecking yard or wherever you might get them, make sure you get the hardware that goes with them. Should be, I mean, the standard hardware is going to be these 12 mil head. I believe these are an 8 mil by 125 pitch bolts. And that's going to be what you'll use to mount them here. So this one on this side is where it's going to get a little difficult. Again, because of that fuel filler neck. So getting to this one in here. Just kind of have to go by feel to get it started. And then once you've got that in there, this is where you're going to need to just go in with a wrench and probably only get about a quarter turn at a time on this bolt. It'll just be a slow process getting that in. Alright, now that the sway bar mounting brackets are installed, we can install the sway bar. So this goes in with this hoop part here. This will actually loop over the exhaust, which this car currently does not have. That will make installing this a lot easier. You can still install it with the exhaust in place. You'll just have to sort of thread it around the exhaust pipe
and just behind the muffler, which will would normally sit right here. So these mounting brackets for the sway bar, when it's set up in here, these guys will fit into this little slot and then be bolted down around the bushing. It's kind of difficult to get everything in place. Well, I'm trying to hold the camera here, but if you just imagine the bushing going through there, and that's how that is put together. Alright, so we're going to do a little issue installing this Impreza sway bar here on this Legacy. I forgot that these ones will not fit the Legacies because of this extra bracket here by the spare tire well. These ones are just pretty much straight across, and it hits that right there, and before it will line up with the mounting brackets. So I went through my part stash and found this 17mm Legacy Outback sway bar. So as you can see, this Legacy sway bar has a little bit of a bend in it here, so it'll clear that part of the spare tire well down there. This sway bar here is out of, I think, like a second gen Legacy, 95, 99. So we're gonna go ahead and go with this one. Yeah, these Impreza ones are a little different. Alright, so now we can go ahead and get this 17mm Legacy bar installed. And I like to get both these mounting brackets on here before completely tightening either of them down. So you're going to want to be able to move this around a little bit as you're getting it installed, and once you tighten this down all the way, it'll become quite a little bit more difficult to rotate this bar, move it around. Alright, now that the bar is on there, go ahead and install the end links. I'm putting these in. The hardware, you should have one bolt that's got a large washer on it. That's going to go on the sway bar side with the nut on the back of it there. And the other end is going to slide here into the end link. It's a little bit of a tight fit right now because the suspension is at a full drop. This is why I'd like to leave everything loose. Don't tighten anything down until it's all installed. And just repeat that on the other side, and that's really all there is to it. So you add a sway bar to a Subaru that never came with one from the factory. So actually pretty simple. And if you were to do upgrades like get a bigger sway bar or get some nice solid end links from White Line or somebody, add bushings here, stronger brackets here, basically all the same install. This is just how to do it with all stock factory parts. And if you go and get all this stuff from the junkyard, you can actually get it done pretty cheaply. And 17mm bar like this off of an Outback, be a pretty noticeable difference, especially if you're coming from having no sway bar. So something I would definitely recommend. But yeah, that's about all there is to it.